Have you ever wondered what does a productive person actually does differently, hour by hour, day by day? And no, I'm not talking about the aesthetic or hardcore routines or the super organized planners, but what their life actually looks like behind the scenes. And that's why I decided to learn from someone TEDx once called the most productive man you'll ever meet. Thankfully, this man wrote a book on how to be one. So I figured the least I can do is actually test his idea. But instead of summarizing all the ideas for you, I treated this book like a manual for a whole month. No shortcuts, no picking favorites. I applied everything. And if this system actually works, it could completely change how I approach my life. But if it doesn't, then one of the most famous productivity experiments might be missing something important. But before we get into experimenting, I wanted to give you a little bit of context of my relationship with productivity. Because for the most part, I would consider myself really productive already. But I vividly remember having a conversation with my best friend back in April 2025. And the question that I was wrestling with at that time, what does productivity truly mean? Because at that time, I was the type who would put things on her to-do list and literally get everything done. And yet, I admitted that despite that, I never felt that it was truly enough. And that feeling followed me everywhere. Even my own husband noticed it. One day, he said something that honestly stung a little bit. When things don't go according to your plan, everyone in the family feels your disappointment. Ouch. And if you should know anything about me, when a question like that enters my mind, I cannot let it go. I need to know the answer and understand it. And to be fair, ever since then, I've made a lot of progress. In fact, the very first video that really took off on my channel was all about productivity, because by that point, I had already built systems that had worked for me. I tracked my time daily, I knew how to set top priorities, thanks to the book 12-Week Year Plan. I protected my attention from my phone, and I had a really strong morning and evening routine, and I knew how to take care of my health. So as you can see, I already have a really strong baseline. So if there's anything good in this book, it would have to dramatically shift the way I see and do productivity. So you might be wondering, what's the deal? Why revisit productivity again? Well, if you're new here, I'm currently in the process of a life experiment where I'm intentionally building my dream life. And to realistically achieve everything I set out to do before I turned 35, I knew that productivity would have to play a role, but not at the cost of burnout and losing my mind. And that's exactly what this book promises. It claims you can be highly productive while still being grounded and intentional. So, in theory, if I apply everything in this book, I should be extremely productive and achieve anything I put my mind into. So, let's go back to the original question. What does productivity actually mean? Because according to Chris Bailey, most of us have been defining productivity completely wrong. For years, productivity meant doing more, faster, and squeezing as many tasks into the day as possible. But Chris argues that in a knowledge economy, that definition doesn't work anymore. And honestly, when I read that, something clicked. Because it perfectly explained why I felt that way back in April 2025. I could finish everything on my to-do list, and yet I still felt like it was never enough. So how does he define productivity? Productivity is doing what you intend to do. Now hold up, I know what you're thinking. How is that different from what we thought before? I get you because I felt the same way. Obviously, we're making a to-do list because we intend to do those things. Well, after reading it many times, what he's essentially saying is, productivity is intentionally choosing what deserves your attention and focusing your time and energy only on those things. In other words, when we truly know what matters and what is meaningful in our life, and when we do those things with intention, then we become truly productive. So, before applying any of the tactics in this book, Chris Bailey argues that you need to lay the groundwork first. Because if you don't know why you're trying to be productive in the first place, you'll just end up doing more things without knowing whether they truly matter in the first place. And to figure out what matters in your life, he suggested to create a hotspot list. Essentially, what this is your life boil down into one place. He breaks his into this category. Now, this part actually looked very familiar to me because if you've been following me for a while now, you know I talk about my life pillars. So my version looked like this. So essentially, under each category, you're going to list everything that you're responsible for, the things that you want to do to maintain that area of your life, and any projects or goals that's connected to it. Now, Chris doesn't explicitly say that this is what you have to do with your hotspot list, but since I'm already making the connections for you guys with the other tips that he had given, it makes sense that once you see your life beautifully laid out like this, it's the perfect time to figure out what are your highest impact tasks versus your low impact tasks. Basically, the high impact tasks are what moves the needle in your life. So the actions that produces the biggest results in your life. And then everything else, those are called your low impact tasks. The things that still needs to happen but probably shouldn't dominate your time and energy. Some of them can be automated, some can be delegated, and some honestly just needs less attention. But even after figuring all of that out, Chris argues that clarity alone is not enough because productivity doesn't just depend on what you choose to do, but also whether you can actually show up and do things well. And according to him, that comes down to managing three core resources: your time, energy, and your attention. And that raises a bigger question. Because if productivity really comes down to managing your time, energy, and attention, then what does that actually look like in real life? Not in theory, but in a normal day. So for the next portion of the experiment, I structured my day the way Chris Bailey would suggest a highly productive person would. Let's jump into his daily routine. I've rated the top life-changing tips, and there's 5 of them in total, so watch out for those. A productive day starts before the week even begins. Before Monday arrives, you need a maintenance day where you take care of everything that keeps life functional. For Chris, he's able to manage his whole household task within 4 to 6 hours. But for me, it works slightly different, and I'll explain why in my reflection section later on. That being said, some version of this definitely happens every Sunday. Another thing he maintains is his digital world. Finally, he plans for the week in 3 steps. First, he brain dumps anything that needs to be done with an action step. And when it's time to get those things done, he makes sure to actually get it done. This is the key to making sure that your mind actually stays free to do the important things. Speaking of important things, before the week starts, he writes down his top 3 priorities for the week ahead. And before he starts his day, he writes down his top 3 priorities for the day to support the outcome of his intention for the week. Here's the good news. You don't have to wake up at 5 a.m. to be productive. Chris doesn't advocate for that at all. What matters is waking up at a time that works for you and using your waking hours intentionally. Everybody has a different energy fuel tank, and so the most productive thing to do is to make sure that your tank is full, not whether you're waking up at 5 a.m. Now, there are 3 ways to train your attention. 2 of them are done before you start working. I love how simple he explains what meditation is. Basically, you set a timer, focus on your breath during that time, and when your mind wanders, which is totally normal, you gently train it to focus back on your breathing. I used to get so upset by how often my mind wanders, but he explained that the rep actually lies in bringing your focus back on your breathing. In other words, that's the actual rep for your attention muscle. The second way to train your attention is through the mind capture ritual. Imagine doing something that looks like you're not doing anything, and yet it leads to the biggest breakthroughs. That's this ritual. You're not planning, you're not organizing, you're creating space. And the idea is simple. You give your brain room to wander. The goal is not to stop thinking, since that's impossible. But this is also not a structured brain dump. It's even better than that. Basically, you're allowing your subconscious mind to bring out the ideas, solutions, and insights that you don't have space for during your busy hours. Your brain is constantly connecting dots. This ritual lets you catch those connections instead of losing them. And the more often you practice this, the better it works. This is pretty self-explanatory. So any time and energy you spend on moving your body is energy that you get back in return. Chris is very big on making sure to turn off all of your notifications before entering your work block. Distractions, i.e., the digital world, is the biggest killer of productivity. Your first deep work session should be in line with your biological prime time, the time in which you are the most alert and have the most energy. This is the time you work on your highest impact task. When you finish the task that truly moves the needle, the ones that produce real results, you not only feel productive, you embody productivity. Following the stack is what helped me to stop feeling like what I do is never enough. I no longer felt I was busy just for the sake of being busy, because it ensured that the most important things in my life gets the best of me and it's always done. One of the most counterintuitive tips he gave in this book is to shrink the time allotted for important tasks. The idea behind it is that by setting artificial constraints, you increase urgency, and urgency increases focus. Now, the next tip is very unique, and that's to drink your caffeine strategically. I don't know why I never thought of this before, but it's so true. Caffeine doesn't actually create energy, it simply borrows energy from later in the day. And so, it makes sense to summon the energy when you need it the most. And honestly, I hit a wall pretty quickly. Since everything about this content creation is new to me, after doing a full hour and a half of deep work, I definitely need the booze. This intentionally changed my relationship with caffeine. And now, it's a partner that comes at exactly the right time when I need it. One of the most fascinating research talked about in his book is that we only bring 53% of our attention to the table at any given time. And this is where we leak time without even noticing. If we only bring half of our attention to any specific task, that means we would have to do that job twice to get it done. It's also so interesting how he explained the reason behind multitasking. Nobody likes the idea of single tasking because we get a dopamine hit every time we multitask. And obviously, whatever feels good becomes a habit. But even though the brain rewards multitasking, our brain is simply not built to focus on more than one thing at once. Multitasking means we are only skimming the surface of our work. And so, if we want to be productive, we have to train it to focus on a single task. And this is the third thing you can do to strengthen your attention. By focusing on one task for a short amount of time and then taking a break. Eventually, you can expand the length of time before taking a break. In the past, I've been super guilty of skipping lunch for the sake of productivity. Since energy is part of the trio, lunch becomes non-negotiable. And eating for energy only requires two rules. One, eat more foods that take longer to digest. And 2, notice when you're full and then stop eating. Another productivity hack is to shrink or delegate any lower impact tasks. So these are tasks that needs to be done, but they don't really yield much results for you. So if you have a business, you'll hire someone to do these tasks for you. This section definitely did not apply at my current stage in life, but the tips make sense. If delegation isn't possible, shrink the time window because constraints creates efficiency. Another tip to free up your attention is to jot down on a notebook any worries or tasks that surface throughout the day. It's amazing how the simple act of writing down what's weighing on your mind throughout the day is so incredibly freeing. When you capture worries, reminders, and loose ends on paper, and allot time to think about those things, you accommodate for your brain's weakness and capitalize on its strength. Your attention stays focused, and your brain can do what it's actually good at doing, which is to solve problems. And that makes you more productive. But for this to work, it's really important that you make time to process them, to make sure that your brain does not freak out on you. This has now become a part of my ritual to create a clean psychological break from work. And lastly, to sustain this rhythm, you need a recovery system to replenish your energy and attention. Now, I have a full video of everything that encompasses what I do for my evening routine, and it's geared towards preventing burnout, which naturally aligns to what contributes to productivity. So, after living the system for a whole month, here's my honest reflection. There are genuinely powerful ideas in this book. In fact, I would say it's honestly one of the best productivity books I have ever read. And that's not surprising since the author himself basically dedicated his life into understanding productivity. So 99% of what you will find in this book is absolutely worth keeping. But I wanted to highlight why certain things didn't work for me and what this book underestimates. So this tip is basically Parkinson's law at play, which says that work expands to fill the time that's available. So in other words, if you give yourself 3 hours to get something done, it will probably take you 3 hours to get that thing done. But if you were to give yourself an hour to do something, you will find a way to make sure that you finish it within 1 hour. Think of all the times that you procrastinated on a project when you were in school and you waited till the day before to get it done, and somehow, miraculously, it gets done. So this idea definitely makes a lot of sense. But I noticed something important while applying it in my life this time around. You see, many productivity strategies is often designed for people who already knows how to do the work, but they just struggle with distractions, procrastination, or inefficiency. Beginners usually have a different set of challenge. It's not about speed, it's more about understanding something. So if you already know the ins and out of your work, shrinking time can just force you to eliminate any unnecessary steps. But if you're still learning and you're still trying to figure things out, which is where I'm at this part of my journey, shrinking time actually just creates the wrong type of pressure. That makes sense because when you're a beginner, the priority shouldn't be about speed, but it should be about just mastering the process. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying Parkinson's law does not apply to anyone who's learning. It absolutely can. So instead of aggressively compressing the time it takes to finish a task, it's more helpful to set focused time limits. That way, you prevent yourself from endless tweaking and overthinking, which I often do a lot. And that shift helped me to focus on learning and progress instead of rushing towards a result that I don't fully understand yet. And interestingly, this perspective is actually supported by learning science. Research shows that strategies designed to increase speed and efficiency tend to work only after a certain level of competence already exists. In other words, first you have to build understanding and then you can optimize for speed. And for me, that distinction made a difference on how useful this tip was. Now, the idea of completing all of your chores in one day sounds super efficient, but I just feel like life doesn't neatly work that way. Energy fluctuates, unexpected things comes up, and overall, I feel like everybody just have a different standard when it comes to cleanliness. Now, Chris had mentioned that when he was doing this experiment, he actually moved into his girlfriend's basement, and that would explain why his maintenance list only took him about 4 to 6 hours. It doesn't work in this household because, for one, my husband and I are both clean freaks, and two, we have 2 levels of floors to clean with 3 bedrooms. Now, we both managed to shrink the amount of time that we spend on doing chores while still holding the standard that we feel comfortable with when it comes to orderliness and cleanliness. But still, we find a single maintenance day is just unrealistic. And here's where I struggled the most. I know the book focuses on the 3 pillars, which is your time, energy, and attention. And I agree, those things are critical. But what it doesn't fully account for is the natural fluctuation of human emotions. So you can eat well, sleep well, exercise, follow your routines, protect your attention, and still you will have days that you just don't want to push. And sometimes you just can't system your way out of them. I've had plenty of days where I followed the system perfectly to set myself up for a productive day, and yet after doing it, I still didn't feel productive after. And that doesn't mean that his system failed, but it does mean that productivity isn't purely mechanical. There's definitely an emotional layer to it, and this system alone is not enough. And I think acknowledging that is really important, especially when we seek out advice about productivity. Also, I think it's worth noting that this author, a few years after releasing this book, actually wrote a book about calming the mind. And in that book, he actually talked about burning out from productivity. I have yet to apply everything that he wrote in that book, but I already have a theory that when it comes to productivity, I do think that there is an emotional layer to it, and that requires a different strategy in addition to systems like this. And that's it, guys. I think that's all I have to say about this book. It definitely offers a strong framework, but like with any framework, it works best when you adapt it to your personal life. And so if you enjoyed this video, please leave me a comment below. I'd really love to hear your thoughts about productivity. And if you have any tip that is not mentioned in this book, please leave it in the comments below. I'd love to learn from you. Thank you so much for supporting me and this channel. Till next time, see you guys.